Welcome into another Key of David podcast. I'm joined by my co-host, David the Lion Douglas, and Trevor the Key Keys. And we're going to take a little bit of a break from Book of Mormon geography, and we're going to touch on a subject that I'm really excited about. So we brought Lance Weaver back on, but instead of talking Book of Mormon geography, we're going to talk about an unknown Jewish prophet that really nobody knows about. And you can't find anything about him on YouTube. You can barely find anything about him online unless you know exactly what you're searching for. So Lance, welcome to the show.
I'm excited to be here. It's always fun to hang out, guys.
Yeah, we love having Lance Weaver on the show. He's one of our most interesting characters and just has so much information. So let's jump right into it, Lance.
And he's highly requested as well.
Oh, he is.
In the comments, everyone's like, "When are you going to come and Lance back?" I'm like, "Give us a break."
Lance coming back on? People love the reincarnation. If you haven't watched the reincarnation video, go check that one out with Lance. I think you're going to find this one just as interesting because this is stuff that's just being revealed. The name of the prophet we're going to be discussing, well, Lance, I'll let you take it over because you know so much about him and his prophecies.
All right, yeah, let's talk about it because this really is. I mean, it's such spectacular stuff, and I hope that I can treat it well. I mean, it's almost hard for me to like jump into this because it's so big. There's so much stuff. We're only going to be able to talk about the tiniest little bit of it. But in general, right? So in now I'm going to talk about last days prophecy, right? So we're going to go through a ton of last day prophecy. I've done so much stuff on prophecy, and I'm going to show a number of things that nobody knows about, right? This is all completely original stuff, right? And you can call it like God told me this, or you can say, hey, he's cuckoo. He's just still in his own beings, like things that just came in his head, and he's thinking it's inspiration when it's not. You decide, right? I'm not going to try and strong arm anyone into trying to, I'm not going to try to convince you, really. I'm just going to present what's come to me because it's pretty amazing. Okay, so what I want to do, like in the end of this, I'm going to go through a prophetic timeline, right? And it's like I say, most prophetic timelines out there are people just parroting each other, right? They're just like pointing to 2,000 years after Christ and saying 2033, 2030, 2034, that all the rapture and the last days, whether they're Mormon or evangelicals, they all kind of tell the same story. I'm going to tell a very different story.
Right? I didn't know we were doing a timeline with Lance, bro. Let's go.
We're full on getting to a timeline. Okay, and
I was
the reason
expecting
why
to
my
talk
timeline,
about rocks. So this is great.
Dude, anytime you want to throw in rock talk, you just bring
rock
it up.
Talk.
I'll go run with that. But anyway, in order to get there, in order to get to my last day timeline, right, with actual dates on it and very like detailed what's happening for the next 200 years, I first want to go through sources, right? And I have 3 or 4 very unique sources that really nobody in Mormonism uses. And when you delve into these sources, it will blow your mind. Like it completely expands the entire topic of prophecy. Okay. And we're going to go through science and how these timelines actually go along with scientific phenomenon, like things of physics and astronomy. But first of all, so the first thing I want to do is I just want to like hit on the Great Disappointment and make sure that we do not do the same thing. Okay. So for those who don't know what the Great Disappointment was, right? It was, you can look up the Wikipedia article. There's a huge thing on it. There was a big hubbub right around in the 1830s where everyone thought the second coming was coming, right? Everyone thought it's here. And the Millerites, right? This Miller guy, he came up with this very like sophisticated timeline that came through all these historical points, and it all pointed to 1843 as being the last days when Christ would come. And there was a lot of people, the entire Adventist, Seventh-day Adventists, the Jehovah's Witnesses, they were all on this boat, right? And they thought that Christ was about to come. And when he didn't come, they were totally disappointed. And it all just kind of fell apart, and they had to reinterpret everything, and all their hopes and dreams were just like dashed, right? Now I'm kind of telling you that the same thing is happening right now. Okay, we've got this huge buildup and hubbub, and everyone's like 2034, 2030, right in there. Everyone's like, it's coming, it's all happening. Okay, I'm telling you, it's going to be a great disappointment. But this is kind of the cool part. The Great Disappointment actually wasn't a great disappointment, right? They were actually right, because 1834 pointed right to when all the keys, right, were
I mean, 1843.
well, yeah, okay. So, and if you want to play with the 7 years, because it's at the beginning of the last 7 years, right? The 7
Okay.
years of desolation, at the middle of the 7 years of Daniel, is the end of the 7 years, right? But that exact era, right, 1835 to 1843, that is when the priesthood was revealed. That's when Elijah came. It's when the temple was restored. It's when everything
And
went down.
Jesus showed up. Jesus showed up in 1836 in the Kirtland Temple. So
Exactly. Yep. And he'd already come in 1820.
right.
Okay, it all went down. They were just disappointed because they didn't understand the prophecy. Okay, and I'm telling you that the exact same thing is happening today. Like, Jesus has come. He's appeared to a prophet, and I'm going to talk about him. Okay, he has revealed new revelation, right? It's here for everybody to read, this new revelation. It's pretty spectacular. And if you're wise enough to see what is about to happen, when it happens, it will validate your faith. But if you join in with the great crowds, you'll just be greatly disappointed because Christ isn't going to come the way you thought he was going to come. Right? Does that make sense? Okay, so let's jump in to the prophet, because if we heed the prophets, right? If you would have listened to Joseph Smith, you would have listened to the apostles when Christ came to them, you wouldn't have been disappointed, right? Your joy would have been made full. Same thing here. I'm telling you, here's a prophet. He's coming to herald the 70th week of the Gentiles that we're going to talk about, Daniel's prophecy. It's here. Right. Anyway, it's really cool. This is all going to make sense. But let's talk about these 3 different texts. The first one is the Book of Catherine, and this is the one that is written by a modern prophet. Okay, this is a Jewish prophet. He's a Jew that was probably born in his prophecy. It gives kind of some keys to his age. He's probably about 52 years old. The prophecy first came to him in 2006 or 7, or in 1996 or 1997, and then 10 years later, he was commanded to write it down. Right, so 2006 or 2007. And then about 5 years later, it was placed online for a very short time, right? He has some disciples, some followers, and one of them put it online, and then I think that he made him take it down. It was put on primarily in a Hebrew website, because this is a Jewish person who lives in Israel. The prophecy was given in Hebrew, but there are English translations. Right?
And as far as you know, he's still living, and he's still in Israel? Okay.
Absolutely. Right. And we're going to go through some clues that suggest, I think that the 2 witnesses in Revelation are largely symbolic, but there's always kind of that literal aspect of the symbology too. I think there's a really good chance that he is one of them, right? At the end of the prophecy tells that he will work miracles in Israel, right? We're talking like raise the dead, restore the blind sight, not small miracles, not just like healing somebody's flu. This is like people raised from the dead, miracles not seen since Jesus. Right. So, and this is a huge, amazing test for everyone. Like all of us Mormons, right? We're the same as the Jews. We like to laud the dead prophets, but if like a real prophet come who isn't our high priest, right? Just like the Jews, they had a high priest and they believed in their high priest. They didn't believe in the prophets. We're the same way. We're like, the only one who can receive prophecy is our high priest. And if anyone else comes, we're going to stone them.
Lance, can I just pipe in here? And I've mentioned this on other podcasts, but I'm going to mention it again. Joel 2, 28 and 29. I'm going to read it. And the reason I'm going to do this is because this same thing was quoted by Moroni when he visited Joseph Smith. And it says, "And it shall come to pass afterwards that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions. And also upon the servants and upon the handmaids in those days will I pour out my spirit." So it's talking about the last days, and we have to understand, it doesn't say to my people that are a part of this church or a part of this race, or it just says to all, upon all flesh. And so we've got to pay attention, no matter Latter-day Saint or not, we got to pay attention to all flesh and see where these prophecies may be coming from, or where these prophets might be coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is, there's prophets like Annas and all these, kind of lesser prophets we see in the Bible. And then there's the big ones, Isaiah, Ezekiel, the ones that say, "Thus saith the Lord," that speak in first person, right? And that is what this revelation is. The Book of Catherine, 70 chapters long, like I said, written down at least in 2006. We'll go through some of it, but it is first person, "Thus saith the Lord." And there's some like accessory material in it. And that's where it kind of talks about how this prophet is supposed to just kind of chill, basically. Like he's given explicit instructions to not like start a church, to not get any kind of big following. He's just supposed to chill until the Lord calls him. And when the Lord calls him, his prophecies will happen, and he'll prophesy in the 70th week. So anyway, let's dive into it because it's pretty wild. And I'll just kind of say here in this page, there's two other texts we're going to talk about that give just amazing material, the Kolbrin and Oahspe. Most people haven't heard about them. They're both like 1,000 pages long. I've spent a huge amount of time studying both. I know them really well. They give unbelievable insight, but there are more things that you want to look at apocryphally, right?
How long is the Ben Catherine book?
It is, I mean, it depends on the size of the text, but it's 70 chapters. So it's about the size of Isaiah.
Okay.
Yep. And every single verse in it is an allusion to another Old Testament prophecy, right? I mean, if you want to say that this guy was not a prophet and you read it and you're like, nah, he's not a prophet, well, you got to at least admit that he passed the smell test in the Doctrine and Covenants, where it's like, well, why don't you guys try and write anything even half as good? Like this guy has the Bible memorized if he's not a prophet, because every single verse is an allusion to some Old Testament thing. Like you'll read it and you won't get it, and then you'll just go read Isaiah and Ezekiel and you'll be like, holy crap, like how does he weave every single aspect of the Old Testament into this prophecy?
So did you snag this when it was available online? Did you like download it so you had a copy of it? Because it's gone now.
Yeah, it's gone. And I mean, I'm still like I said, I had some crazy experiences. My patriarchal blessing. I had a literal voice tell me the search phrase to find this book, right? And when I found it, like, I mean, it was like impressed, like strong, like get this now, read this. And I remember reading through it for about months, and kind of just being a little skeptical, because I'm kind of skeptical by nature, and just being like, part of me was like, wow, this is just making me burn inside. I know this is true. And then part of me is like, no, it can't be. But after now 15 years of reading it hundreds of times, I know that it's true. I know that it's true, right? I mean, I know the Book of Mormon is true because when I read it, my entire body burned, like in a way that is unexplainable, not just like touchy emotions, like I watched a nice movie, but like that burning fire. Like, I know that the Kolbrin is true. Like this guy is a prophet. You guys will have to make your own decisions.
Have you ever like considered flying to Israel and finding this guy?
It's absolutely part of my plan. Yeah. So
yes, in the field trip.
I think it'll become difficult because when he comes on the scene, things are going to be a little ugly, right? The entire prophecy is about God turning Israel. It basically goes through, like, let's kind of jump in. I'm going to go through it and tell you a little bit of the story, right? But I just want to impress, like, to people, just remember how difficult it actually is to. It's crazy because we watch The Chosen, we watch all these movies of all these prophets in the old times, and we think, oh, we would have accepted them, right? We totally would have believed in John the Baptist. We totally would have believed in Jesus, right? But it's like, would you have? Like, really ask yourself that. And when you read this, you can kind of answer that question, because this really is, we have the chance right now to accept a prophet that is brand new, that nobody else believes in. But let's go through some of this stuff. Okay. So some of the really interesting messages he makes, I'm just going to read a couple of these, right? He talks about the fullness of the Gentiles, right? A lot, right? And in different translations of the Bible, they call it, instead of the fullness of Gentiles, they call it the fullness of the nations, right? Because Gentiles and nations is a synonymous word in Hebrew. So you'll see that he talks about that after the fullness of the nations, or in other words, the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, that day they'll no more say last days, and no one shall be hurt. He really chides people in the prophecy for like making such a big deal about the last days and this huge battle of Armageddon, and just this entire kind of Christian belief that everything's going to go down all at once, and Christ is going to come and the rapture is going to happen, right? And he just bashes that. He's like, that's not how it's going to go down. There's going to be a great disappointment. What they don't understand. And, there's partner tribulation. Everyone's talking about the tribulation. The 7-year tribulation is going to happen. And that's going to be what happens before the rapture happens and Christ comes. That's not how it's going to go down. Like, I love the words of how he says it's like tribulation, great tribulation. My soul is in tribulation at the bleat of their words. I cannot bear them. Last days are a mockery. I do not wish to hear them. Your days have been long. Full of days hast thou been, O Heshbon. Ammon still remaineth, and Moab's wastes are still not arid. Have you been removed except by judgment, so that another may take your place in an arid time to come? So shall thy preaching foretell thine own removal. Thy days have been as full as the former days, prosperous Hashbon, whose last days do they see or see? Say no more last days, but come unto the Lord, the great God, the God of the horn of Judah, the Redeemer of Jacob. Tribulation.
What does Heshbon mean?
That is a city in Jordan, right? That
Okay.
they left from in order to come across the Jordan River. And you'll see in this, I mean, if you like I said, you can spend your entire life studying this and you won't get it, because there are so many allusions to so many biblical things. Like every place name that you hear is an entire story that you got to go delve in and be like, well, what's going on? What happened in Shechem? What happened in Ashkelon? Why is it talking about this or that? It's just this tapestry woven together of Old Testament prophecy, right? And you'll always find it in 2 or 3 places in the Old Testament. But this is another part where he kind of bashes the predominant narrative. He says, what use is there in speaking to man? His ways are set, his path leadeth to destruction. Upon a horse with a switchback doth he set his gallop to his end. Take ye heed, O ye of Samaria, and hearken unto this oracle. Ye shall not go down with Megiddo, which is Armageddon, right? Nor shall the Lord overturn you with a mighty battle. You set your tempo to the end, and it cometh as a snare in an unexpected place, without honor and without chance to draw the sword. Ye turn aside your faces from the merchandise of God and Gog, and the affliction of the maidens of Magog, in that they are caused to be made harlots. Therefore I have turned my face away from thine indenturing to America, and thou shalt be indentured for a season as the harlots of Magog, the merchandise of Gog and Damascus. But thy bed shall not cause thee to earn thy redemption. I, the Lord, shall redeem. O scattered captivity, and thou entire Palestinia, you've chosen a hard way. A fool's ears are on his back, and with a rod must he be taught. Anyway, these are all messages to the nation of Israel, right? Heralding the fact that he is about to punish Israel, the nation of Israel, and that through this punishment, they are going to be turned to the Messiah, right? And this is a messianic Jew. So the Messiah, they are going to come eventually to believe in Christ, and this is going to be the beginning of it.
So Ben Catherine, when you say is a messianic Jew, he's a Jew that believes in Jesus, right?
Yes. Yeah. And it's really interesting the way that Christ is very subtly woven through this prophecy, because it's so subtle in a way that most Jews they're not going to read it and be like, recoil and be like, oh, this is just messianic Christianity garbage, right? Because it's so subtle that you could read it 2 or 3 times as a Jew and be like, oh, there's no Christ in there. But little by little, as you like pull out all of these allusions to Christ, you'd be like, oh, holy cow, this is full on telling us how we rejected Christ and how we need to come to Christ, right? And he talks about how that they're going to call a bunch of prophets. He's just the beginning of an age of prophets. It's almost like a repetition of what happened during the Babylonian captivity. But as soon as they went to captivity, they had, Ezekiel, you had Daniel, you had all these prophets called.
So do you think tribulation or hard times create more prophetic times?
Absolutely. Because they bring about that kind of state of mind and heart that is needed to really connect to God in heaven.
Totally.
Yeah. And that's basically the message of what's happening here. This Gog and Magog is a northern confederation involving at least Syria and Lebanon and Jordan, but probably Iran and Russia. And they are going to attack Israel. And Israel's will basically change, right? It kind of gets this idea that Israel has been a puppet state to the West for 70 years, right? From its formation to now. America, and this is crazy because when this was given, like this talks about how America will turn its back on Israel when Israel is attacked and not help it. And I remember when I read this being like, what? It's impossible. Like in the early 2000s when I read this, it's like America would never turn on Israel. Like that's unthinkable. Like, and not only that, we were fighting the Gulf War. It's like, well, we're so strong. There's no one who's gonna. That couldn't happen. Like we've got 1 million troops in the Middle East. In the early 2000s during the Gulf War. There's no way that this is going to happen. And yet now, how I see how America is turning on Israel. And now all it would take right now is probably for the Democrats to take the presidency again with Harris. They might completely turn on Israel, but maybe it'll take another year, another 10 years. But the prophecy is that America will absolutely turn on Israel. We'll abandon Israel. Israel will be attacked, and we will let it be attacked. And then they will go into another 70 years of captivity. In the same way that they've had 70 years of captivity to America, they've been a puppet state to the West, they will become a puppet state to the East, right? 70 years of captivity to this Gog and Damascus. And it will be actually a very, very good thing for them, right? They will no longer be dependent on America. They'll be dependent more on Russia and these Middle Eastern countries, but they will flourish in that environment. Even though the changeover will be very difficult, they will spread in this new empire the same way that the church in America, right? The LDS church has spread and done amazingly in our captivity in America, in the USA. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
Okay,
Now, Lance, there's a lot of people that think that instead of America controlling Israel, that Israel's controlling America. That certainly isn't your viewpoint. Your viewpoint is America's got their hooks into Israel, not the other way around.
Oh yeah, I mean, so there's scattered Israel who make a lot of decision making in the United States, but as far as nation states go, I mean, Israel foreign policy does not rule American foreign policy. In fact, if you listen to some of the kind of candid interviews of Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders, they talk about how that ever since the founding of Israel, both the British and the Americans have always kept their own interests at hand over Israel's. Like Israel does a good job of trying to change our policy, but we're always looking out for number one. It's always been the game of oil, right? We've always played a game of appeasement to the Middle East and Israel. We've never been like, oh yeah, Israel, have your way. And I know people see it that way, and there's like ways you can kind of point it that way, but that's not the predominant narrative. Let me just fly through some of these other ones.
And YouTube's going to like this algorithm. YouTube, listen to us, because they don't like, they're going to like that algo.
Right. Yeah. And we'll talk more a little bit about Israel in my last slide when we talk about the prophetic timeline, right? Because that really fits in there. It's pretty awesome. So anyway, this one is just really cool. One thing, awesome part of the prophecy, he's like, well, people are going to believe me. Israel's not going to believe me. Right? And he says, and the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, give ear, my servant, if any of the elders of Israel come before thee to prove thee, if thou hast spoken in my name, or say outright thou hast not spoken in my name, sit before them and say, hard eyes, hard minds, see the ducks walk and the geese meander, see them lead their chicks on their way. Are they not a sight? Though they lead, doth not they that follow walk even as they? Have ye not walked this way since your own youth? Though ye lead, you're a sight, the way of habit, amusing of the source of laughter. When man walketh too, do they not even scatter and waddle away, parting before the greater force? Even soon do I bring my words to pass, and ye shall part before the storm of the Lord. Give little attention to my words, ye hard-hearted. So shall the nations and people give little attention to it for the convulsions that shall come upon them. Each shall fear their own sins, and cast not an eye to Jerusalem. Because ye sought the land to take comfort in it, and because the heathen proclaimed to you that the land was the jewel of my covenant, hear ye the word from the Lord. I appoint to you 70 years of captivity again, captivity and desolation in your own land, captivity which ye expounders of false laws could not extract because of your hard hearts, and because ye sought the land and not the Lord, because ye sought a God of your creation. I have given you no place to call upon. Right, and that's huge. Yeah, what he's saying there is like,
what's interesting about this is I have seen lots of Americans really kind of turn almost against Israel with everything that's going on with the war over there. Have you seen the same thing, Lance? I mean, that's kind of prophetic if you look at what you just read and you say, how does that apply today? Boy, I'm seeing a shift away from people that think Israel is not good.
Yeah. And it's cool because go for it,
Trevor.
He's the same thing.
I'm one of those guys. I think I think what they're doing to Gaza is absolutely one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen in my life. Like, and I wasn't that guy 5 years ago, but you know what they're doing right now is setting the stage, is turning the world against them. And like you said, Lance, in the early 2000s, I would have never ever thought that that can be possible, that America would pivot. I've read some of those things in the Bible, and I'm like, yeah, there's no way. But I mean, the moves they're making, and I mean, I'm not a fan of Netanyahu, and I'm not this like pro-Palestinian guy, but it's just shocking what they're doing and what they've been doing to those guys over there. And it's almost like they've been waiting for this. They've been waiting for a war. They've been waiting, because the kind of actions, like you're saying, Trevor, it's just where would they come from? They've been kind of out of the stage for a while.
I mean, like, we could do a whole show just on the complexities of the geopolitics of the Middle East. It's so complicated, and we always want to take a side. You always want to be, this guy's right and this guy's wrong. When the truth is, it's almost like looking at two bullies fighting on the playground, and they both are right and they both are wrong, right? They both got good points, but who do we side with, right? And this prophecy all the way through, if you read it, then you can kind of be able to delve into those nuances and complexities and understand that it's like, well, Israel is the Lord's, right? But what's going on right now is pretty similar to what happened when King Herod started to rebuild the Jewish temple. Like Herod was a puppet to Rome, and he thought he was going to like make things great by rebuilding the temple bigger and better and making it awesome. And everyone's like totally on board, and they're thinking this is the jewel of the covenant, and they were worshiping the temple and the land and thinking that was the jewel of the covenant. And God's like, nope, it's in here. It's in your heart, right? All of this is dross. It's nothing. And as soon as they rejected Christ, all that was just destroyed, right? And a similar thing is going to happen where they're building Israel. They're building the land. The land is the jewel of the covenant. They're taking the land. They're going to restore it. They're restoring the glory. It's all going to be for naught because they're going to be taken over. They're going to be destroyed. And all Christianity is going to think, oh, the second coming here, this is it. And then when nothing happens, except for that Israel basically becomes a puppet to this new rising Islamic power, we're going to be like, what the heck? What happened? Where's our prophetic fulfillment? Where's the rapture? Where's the temple? You know, and it's not going to happen.
The Lord has abandoned us.
Right? Exactly.
And just to note, I think 70 AD is when the temple was destroyed after Christ. So
yes.
Just for those that are wondering.
Yeah, 40 years after Christ. And it gives similar symbolism here. But yeah, in the background, behind what all happens will be a lot of soul searching in Israel. It'll be what brings Israel to repentance and what makes them really search for the Lord. And the Palestinians, it'll be what brings them together. This new kind of messianic form of Judaism that rises out of this prophetic movement is going to bring Islam and Judaism together. So then Judaism will actually bring, so in the same way that you could say that Christ, right, he converted all of Europe essentially to a new religion in like 300 years, right? I mean, Christianity spread so quickly, definitely within, the 2,000 years, the entire place was converted, and who would have ever believed it? What I'm saying is this movement that is being started in Judaism with these prophets is going to convert all of Islam to this new form of Judaism, right? And it'll happen, within 1,000 years. Okay, let's keep going though. There's just a lot of really amazing, crazy things. I'm just going to go through two other little things, then we'll jump to some of the other prophecies really quick. So it talks about the 70th week of the Gentiles, which is Daniel, which we'll get more into. It talks about the abomination of desolation. This is a really awesome place where it really explains what the abomination of desolation of Daniel is, right? From Daniel 9. And it's basically when we create an idol and we put it in the temple. And what does that mean? It's when we imagine God to be what we want him to be, right? We chisel him in our own way. We're like, this is our God, and we're going to make him exactly how we want him to look. We're going to make him look great, and then we're going to set him in the temple and all worship him. That is the abomination which make it desolate. And the prophecy is just completely full of chiding Ephraim, right? Which is a term for not just the church as the archetype, all of Christianity, right? And how we have basically made God into an idol, right? We've made the scriptures into an idol. It's just what man always does, right? And God's going to break that to pieces, right? What we think is going to happen is going to be a disappointment. And what is going to happen will actually be better if you're soft, if your heart is soft. Okay, so yeah, he talks about the 70 week of the Gentiles, how that's when he's supposed to come out and start prophesying, and that we'll kind of know it because the attack will happen on Israel. That then everyone will think nothing happened, just like it says in the book of Daniel, but it will be the beginning of this amazing time. Okay, so let's be done with that. Oh yeah, okay. I'm going to jump into prophecy now, just for a second. But one key point to that is this couple of verses in prophecy, which are really spectacular. So if you know about Daniel 9, right? Daniel 9 is the 70 weeks prophecy. He says that, there's 70 weeks to create upon Jerusalem, and it prophesies for when Christ is going to come. And that 70 times 7 weeks is symbolic of 70 times 7 years, which is 490 years, and 490 years from the Babylon captivity, essentially, to the time of Christ, right? Is this window, and it's 70 or 490 years of Israel, right? The 70 weeks of Israel to Christ. So he does a really weird thing here, though. He talks about the 70th week of the Gentiles. Okay, do you catch that right here? Here is thus saith the Lord thy God, in the year of the 70th Hebdomad, that's just kind of the Greek Hebrew equivalent for a week. So in the year of the 70th week of the Gentiles, set thy face to the east and set it to the west, to the north and then to the south, and prophesy thou against them. Your times have come to a full. In other words, it's the fullness of your time. The Lord God setteth you a time to repent, right? So that's the same thing that happened in the time of Israel. That's the same thing that happened when Christ came. He set them a time to repent. They had 40 years of repentance, and then the temple was destroyed 40 years later. And now he says, now there's a 70th week of the Gentiles. So he's like suggesting that there's kind of a mirrored time. And then he gives a prophecy that talks about how that, so I'm just going to read the second part so you guys can catch it. So he says, bend now a little, give me some time in your minds. I set you now a sign and a riddle. Ezra riseth of the nations, right, from a cold and inhospitable place. And again with nails my laws and my ways and my fulfillment are raised up unto the nations, and my laws go forth. Upon the outer door they be, proclaiming not what is within, but what is not. So understand ye the prophecy of the 70 weeks of the Gentiles. For they who have called themselves my watchmen have been of heavy ears and heavy eyes. All of these have events since, all these weeks since. Okay, do you guys catch what's going on there? It's so subtle, but it's so spectacular, right? He's obviously making an allusion to Martin Luther. Who's the one who nailed the doors, who said what laws weren't inside the church, and so rebuilt the church by nailing it to the outer door? Martin Luther.
I wondered about that.
Nailed the 95 Theses to the outer door of the chapel, right? And that caused the Counter-Reformation to start, which completely transformed the entire church. So he's comparing that to Ezra. He's saying, hey, look, do you see this riddle I'm casting you? I'm going to compare Ezra and Martin Luther and help you guys understand how they did the exact same thing. One of them to Israel in 500 BC essentially, and one of them to the Christian church about 500 years before now. Help you understand that they're on a parallel, and that there's 70 weeks of Israel and a 70 weeks of the Gentiles. If you catch that subtle allusion, and it's woven through other verses.
What did Ezra do?
Ezra rebuilt Jerusalem, essentially, right? Nehemiah and Ezra, they went back from the Babylonian captivity and rebuilt the temple. So they helped oversee the rebuilding of the temple, which is what the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel says, that from the rebuilding of the temple, that there would be 490 years or 70 weeks of years, right? Until the coming of Messiah, and until the tribulation. Okay? So he is casting that as a parallel. And if you catch on it, then you realize it's like, oh, I get what's going on. Like God got to repeating history. There's a 70 weeks of Israel and a 70 weeks of the Gentiles. And if you catch that subtle allusion and then run with it, then suddenly it opens up an entire door of prophecy where you see how history has repeated in ways that cannot be a coincidence, like ways that will blow your mind, right? So like even just here, if you compare the 2,000 years from Abraham to Christ, the time of Israel, to the 2,000 years from Christ to the present, the times of the Gentiles, right? And put them on top of each other and realize how closely they repeated. They both started with 12 apostles or 12 tribes, right? They both started with this huge covenant to Abraham and Jesus and Peter, right? They both go into an Egyptian captivity. In the time of Israel, they go to Egypt. In the time of the church, they go into Constantinople, right? You have this huge captivity. They both get liberated by this massive lawgiver, right? Moses liberates Israel from Egypt and gives them the law. If you know anything about Justinian and Justinian's code, like he brought law to the northern kingdoms, and all these other Germanic tribes immediately formed. I mean, just look up all these things on Wikipedia. They're so spectacular when you find out this legal system that was set up by Justinian and how it caught like wildfire all throughout Europe, and everyone started releasing legal systems at that point, right? And then they go back to Israel, just like the church goes back to Rome, right? And you've got basically the Pope, who is Samuel, ordains Saul to be king, the same way that the Pope makes Charlemagne king and the Holy Roman Empire starts, right? And then the kingdoms split at the exact same time in the timeline. The northern kingdom and southern kingdom of Judah split right there halfway through, just like the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Western Catholic Church split right at 1,000 years into that timeline, right? If you can kind of see right here, the splitting of the kingdom, right? And you get a fall of Israel, and then you get a fall of Constantinople. The Eastern Orthodox thing is taken over by the Muslims. And then you even get the global colonialism happening on the exact same place in the timeline, right? When Columbus comes to America, matches perfectly with when the Lehites go to America. And there's a colonialism where not just the Lehites are leaving.
Wow.
That's cool, right? And you have a Babylonian captivity in Israel. A lot of people don't even know there's actually something called the Babylonian captivity of the church, when the Catholic Church was conquered and taken to France and lived 70 years in France. You ever heard of that? Look it up. The Babylonian captivity of the church, 70 years, called the Avignon Papacy, when the church was taken into France and basically was conquered from Rome and taken into France. They had this captivity, and they fall right in the same place. And then you get like Napoleon sacking Rome, the same time that Antiochus desecrates the temple. Like when Napoleon captured Rome, he actually killed the Pope, put him into captivity, and he died there, right? Just like what happened with Antiochus. You got Alma founding the church in the Americas at the same time that Joseph Smith founded the church in
that's
America,
cool.
both of them, right? You've got like World War II happening, basically these massive wars at the end of the Roman Empire, right before the fall of Jerusalem, right? And we can see what's coming now as the fall of Rome, right? The fall of the Christian church. So these two timelines really have amazing correlations. Like it's like history is repeating essentially, right?
But just for a different group, instead of it being like you got the Gentile timeline and then you got the Jewish or Abrahamic timeline.
Yeah. Israel happens like on a smaller scale in the Middle East, and then suddenly it repeats among the Gentile church, and they follow the exact same pattern. And there's even a scripture like in D&C 57, like where it says, I give you a pattern in all things that you be not deceived. So
did you make this? Did you make this timeline right here?
Yeah,
dude, I love you. You're such a nerd.
Oh, I'll get into it bigger because it gets crazier. Okay, because these types of shadows, where they repeat, they weave all the way through history in really, really cool ways. Okay, so if you get more detailed and you just compare the last 500 years of the time of Israel and the time of the Gentiles,
Holy smokes!
You start.
This looks like a beautiful mind when he's like drawing on the window, trying to do the calculation.
It kind of reminds me of that meme where the guy is just looking at his wall and he's like, "It's all connected."
Yes, I was pulling that up as you were speaking, David.
I mean, you can always tell when you're talking or working with a Jew, right? Because they all suffer from apophenia, which I do sure too, which is finding meaningful patterns out of random data. And I'm sure that there's some of that in play here, right? But when you think about it, that's really like that's kind of like a job as Israel. It's like bringing order out of chaos. But if you look at the chaos of history and you start looking for patterns in it, like the patterns are amazing. And if you try and pigeonhole them and make them like year by year, they fall apart. But if you just look at general patterns, they are, that's me.
This is you, your wife's like, honey, dinner's ready. He's like, hold on a second. I've got the last one dialed in, babe.
I don't know if I can get that. I need to like bug my eyes out a little more. I'm close. Yeah, but if you check out this, like I have these on my website, so you can get into them and look at them a little more carefully. It is really spectacular, the repetition. Like they're things that have repeated, and I don't see how they could be chance.
Hey, I see something down there at the bottom, 62 weeks. Now, the only reason I bring this up is 62 weeks means something to me. I spent 62 months in prison, and so there's that 62. But talk to me about what that 62 weeks means down there at the bottom.
That's interesting. So was there a 7-week period in addition to that?
Yes.
Okay, so 62 weeks is incredibly relevant with the Daniel prophecy, right? If you read here at the bottom, this is actually Daniel 9.
So to break that down, I spent 62 weeks in there, or 62 months in there, but there was 7 weeks from the time I found out when I would get out to the time I got out.
Dude, that's crazy. Okay, so
and I've read Daniel. I've had some weird experiences with page 1111, which is Daniel chapter 7. Before, like, this was like 2014, I started getting into stuff, and I had this light in my room, this lamp, just tip over in the middle of the night. And I'm like, I pick it up and set it back there and go back to sleep, and it tips over again. And I pick it up again. I make sure it's stable. I'm like, okay, I go back to sleep, and it tips over again. I'm like, forget this thing. And I just let it lay there and go back to sleep. And then I hear the same sound. And I'm like, what the heck? So I get up, I walk into my closet, my master closet. We had this like table, and literally on the table was my Bible flung open to page 1111, which was Daniel chapter 7, and I just started reading it. So anyways, it's always been intriguing to me because of that experience.
That's awesome. Remember when we did those word plays on birthdays and stuff? It was like Daniel 9 was mine too. That's wild. That's super relevant. Even the light, right? It's like you could draw so much meaning from that. Like the light among to the Gentiles, it's fallen over, and God's like, correct it. Try and fix the light. And it's not working, and there's got to be something to that. That's cool. Yeah. It's like those. What is the word for that? It's not just serendipitous, but it's like those synchronicities.
Yeah, totally.
That's super powerful. I think that our higher consciousness and God work together to just create those in our lives, right? And we can drive whatever meaning we want out of them.
So teach me about 62 weeks and 7 weeks.
Okay, so the 70-week prophecy, right? Daniel says that a period of 70 weeks is decreed for the people, right? For Israel to, atone for the sin, to bring forth righteousness, to end the cycle, right? 70 weeks, what is 70 weeks of years? That's 70 times 7. And what is 70 times 7? It's 490. So 70
which is a jubilee, right?
Well, so 49 is a jubilee. 490 is kind of like a great year. It's 10 jubilees. And it's a really cool number because it's 70 weeks and 10 jubilees. And it's kind of like where the 10 meets the 7, the square meets the circle. There's so much in this in Kabbalah. Like if you get into like mystical numbers and medieval Jewish works, they go really far into how this stuff all fits into mysticism. But he says that 70 weeks are decreed. He breaks that 70 weeks, right? That 490 years into a set of 7, 62, and 1, right? And he says for 7 weeks, the wall and the city and everything will be being repaired. And then there will be 62 weeks where it seems like nothing happens. And then there'll be one last 7 week, which is the tribulation week, right? And in the midst of that week, Messiah will come and another prince will come, kind of two different people. And then at the end of that, it says the abomination of desolation will make everything desolate. You can see right here. Right. Messiah will confirm the covenant reigning for 1 week. After half the 7, he will put into the sacrifice and offering. The wicked prince will set up a winged abomination or abomination of desolation until the end that is decreed and poured out upon the desolate one. So that's super relevant, right? 7, 62, and 1. So I'm sure if you looked, you'd find it's like you've got a 7-week period, you've got a 62-week period in your own timeline, and then the 1 week after all those, that's when all of the stuff happens. That's when the crap hits the fan.
Wow.
And that's what we're looking for too. Okay, and this is huge. And I'm gonna go into some other texts for a second here, and then we're gonna come back and talk about how that the 62 weeks is woven all throughout history, like the entire biblical timeline of 7,000 years has this 490-year repeating pattern within it. Okay, so let's jump to these other 2 texts that I mentioned too, and we're just going to go through these super fast. I'm going to spend like 5 minutes on them. Okay, so the Kolbrin and Oahspe, incredible books, right? Like I said, each of them 1,000 pages long. Most people misunderstand them. The thing that's really powerful on them, I want to just hit in the Kolbrin. It tells a story about the destroyer, right? And a lot of people have like caught hold of this book, Kolbrin, and they're like, oh, this talks about Planet X and Nerubu and all this kind of retarded stuff. And it's this star that must come back, and it causes all these destructions. It's like, no, you haven't read the book well enough. Like, read the book a little better. Like the people on Rational Wiki who have an article on the Kolbrin, they haven't even read the book. They're idiots, right?
Are you throwing shade on the 9th planet, bro?
I'm throwing shade. I'm going to go through and talk about the real. And anyway, you can call me crazy. I'm saying it's not the 9th planet. And no, there is not some like planet out there coming on some schedule to destroy us all. No, that's misunderstanding the history. Okay, so the Kolbrin says really specifically when it talks about this destroyer that comes by on this schedule. Just hang with me here, Trevor. Hang with me. I think by the end you'll be pleased because I'm going to replace your 9th planet with something that is far more believable and actually being proven by science and helping you understand even why global warming is happening. Are you ready for that?
All right.
Suspend your judgment. I'm sorry that I'm just not on your 9th planet. For all you Nerubu lovers out there, I'm sorry. But just hang with me, okay?
Nibiru.
I'm going to replace your idol. It's going to be like Indiana Jones, right? We're going to replace that idol with a bag of sand, and it's going to be even better than the original idol. Just
make sure it's Nibiru.
Tell me again, Nibiru?
Yeah, there you go.
All right, yeah, I'm dusty on my Sumerian. Nibiru. I'm going to have to do a refresher course there, Nibiru. Okay, let's go for this. Okay, you ready for this?
Yeah.
So just really quick, he says, it
Actually,
was not.
can you remove that hide on the bottom where it shows the stop sharing
look,
hide?
Dude, I didn't
Yeah.
even know you could do that. Why didn't you tell me that, David? Holy cow,
I
that's awesome.
just did. I
All
just
right.
did. You're welcome.
So,
thank you so much.
the other thing, Lance, that I think you do an amazing job of is you take these texts like the Kolbrin or like Ben Catherine's writings, and because of your understanding of the LDS doctrine, you see how it kind of works together and comes together and matches with the LDS scriptures that we have at our disposal.
Yeah. And I've just had so many experiences with that where when I first read them, they made no sense. And I'd say prayers and I'd have kind of like this spirit, my belief right in that period of sleep and wakefulness. I'd have these vision dreams type things and they'd come and they'd teach me. And there was a point when it's like the Mormon people who were teaching me, they couldn't answer my questions. And so it was like, cause I really felt like at first it was all just like people who had grown up in the church, right? It was like our ancestors. And anyway, it's really hard to have cultures come together because your prayers are first answered by your ancestors, and then it takes a lot of work to get to people who know more about history that precedes the people that are answering your prayers. Anyway, so that's weird. Take it for what it's worth. Okay, let me just. I'm going to try and really summarize this because I want to jump back into the last days timeline. I want to get really specific about what's going to happen over the next 100 years. Okay, but I just want to make the point that the Kolbrin is pretty specific that this destroyer that it says destroyed came at the time of Moses. It even talks about it, how it caused a great flood, right? These are all old Egyptian records talking about the destroyer, right? And they talk about it in terms of Apophis, which you guys talked about in your other thing, right? Like Apophis was the Egyptian destroyer, the solar serpent. We could go and talk about that whole thing for 20 minutes itself. Okay. But it says specifically it was not a comet or a loose star, being more like a fiery body of flame. Its movements on high were slow. Below it swirled in a matter of smoke, and it remained close to the sun whose face it hit. There was a bloody redness about it, which changed, passed along its course. It caused death and destruction in its rising and setting. It swept the earth with gray cinder rain. It caused many plagues, hunger, and other evils. It bit the skin of men and beasts until they became muddled with sores. This aspect of the doom's shape, called the destroyer, when it appeared in the days long gone by in olden times, and thus described in the old records, few of which remain. It is said that when it appeared in the heavens above, earth splits open from the heat like a nut roasted before the flame. Okay, it gives these really specific old Egyptian records of this destroyer that came and the destructions it caused. I just want to help people understand it's not a comet or a star. It's close to the sun. It has all these fingers that come out. Why? Because it is the sun. It is a solar event. It is a solar event. It is an insane solar event, right? When the sun, some people call it a micronova, goes absolutely crazy, and these magnetic field lines just go berserk, and they interact with the Earth's magnetic field, and it turns the entire sky a red or green, which the Kolbrin actually talks about. The Kolbrin has a chapter that talks about the coming destruction and what it's going to entail, right? That our scriptures talk about it. I want to really get specific in the physics of what is coming, okay? And I've prayed a lot to know this. Take it for what it's worth. Maybe I'm full of it. Maybe I'm completely building my own idol, apophenic. I'm like thinking things that aren't there, or maybe angels have actually taught this to me. So you decide.
Well, and let's be rational here. A solar flare event is most likely, calamity of anything that we could possibly predict. I mean, it's highly, highly likely and probable.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go.
Hey, Lance, quick question for you. With all this, the northern lights and the kind of crazy lights that we've seen that come from solar flares, do you think that's symbolic of anything that's happened?
I think that it's a harbinger, right? I think that it is a portent of things to come. I think it's going to get worse and worse until it becomes obvious what's going on, right?
So a soft
warming,
sign like, hey, this is coming. Pay attention. I'm trying to give you signs in the skies. When you say harbinger, that's kind of what you mean?
Yeah. And if you haven't followed what is that guy's name?
Jonathan Cahn.
Channel. I guess there's a couple of them. The Celestial Observer guys. who actually track the sun and have YouTube channels that talk about how it's really being pretty crazy, right? Our magnetic field has decayed for some unknown reason, almost 30% of its field strength just in the last 15 years. Like there are serious things happening to our magnetic field that people don't really understand. And it's just barely starting to get into the news. People are talking about maybe there's going to be a reversal, more likely, maybe it's just an excursion. But it'll become more clear. You'll stop within, this is my prediction, within 20 years, you won't hear so much about global warming as you will about climate change caused by solar cycle, some kind of issue with the sun that they know is happening, right? Google right now, solar event, decaying magnetic field. You'll see tons of articles on it. And it's making the jet stream sloppy. It's causing all sorts of weather phenomenon. It is the source of a lot of the crazy things. It's going to get so much worse. Okay. But Oahspe, now I'm going to jump from the Kolbrin to Oahspe. And this is kind of a crazy book, has a lot of junk in it, but so much insightful stuff.
Oahspe, for those of you who don't know, was written in 1888. It's a channeled work. The guy was a dentist, and he just got this download. I mean, I'll grab this book.
Yeah, 1,000 pages.
This is the Oahspe. Like, this is a no joke book. I happened to find it in prison because I was the librarian, and I'm like, what is that book?
Yeah, it's super specific. He says the angels came and visited him and basically controlled his hands, and he typed the whole thing. People talk about how Joseph Smith couldn't have written the Book of Mormon because it's so fast. It happened just like in 30 days or whatever, 90 days. That's Oahspe too.
Yeah, he calls it automatic writing.
Yeah,
it's like these angels were with him, and he just started writing. I mean, I read it. There's no way any human could write that book.
Oh, it's insane. And the drawings that are in it, and all the ancient languages and stuff, it's a lot like the Book of Mormon. It's crazy, and it happened in Kirtland, Ohio. So it's kind of wild. This is like just after Joseph Smith. Yeah. So this is just, it's within 30 miles, I think, of Kirtland. This guy lived in Ohio.
My goodness.
If you read it, you have to be careful because you might give up meat after reading it. That was one of the things that really stood out to me. I don't know about you, Lance, but it was really about a more vegetarian type lifestyle.
Yeah.
What year? What year was that made? That Oahspe?
1888. Yeah. So he's about the same age as Joseph Smith.
And he didn't try to start a movement or anything, did he, with this?
No, but afterwards, because if you read the last maybe 100 pages of it, it basically teaches the United Order. The whole thing is just the United Order. And so he went and tried to start a United Order. And it talks about how you can get revelation. Anyway, just a lot of cool stuff. But in there's parts of it that I don't agree with. Like its Christology is very Muslim sounding, very strange. But and I think it was corrupted. But its part on its cosmology, which is why I really like it, is spectacular. So the most important part of its cosmology, which is like basically stuff in physics that you can actually test, right? It tells about this 3,000-year cycle. And it tells how during this 3,000-year cycle, the Earth comes into these regions of space where you pass through higher dimensional planets, you could say, like higher dimensional bodies, and that those are in charge of the resurrection of the lower dimensional bodies. And so then it gives lots of stories about how the travel between the dimensions happen, how the resurrections happen, how the prophets create timelines according to that astronomy calendar so that they can, have a timeline for the resurrections of both people on Earth, but more importantly, people who are in what it calls atmosphere, which is the spirit world of our Earth. So those people in the spirit world can only jump between the higher levels of the spirit world when we go through these huge 3,000-year cycles, which I'm going to talk about in a second, because I think they bend space-time together and they make it possible so that then you can jump up through the dimensions on a spiritual level. Okay, so it's a really robust cosmology, and I'm just going to go through the tiniest bit of it. So this drawing, can you see my cursor here? The drawing in the bottom left, right? This is Vorkium.
Yep.
So this is something that he drew, which when I first saw it, it blew my mind because I'm like, oh, I kind of recognize that, right? That is a double interference pattern.
In the heart of Zion, where the truth shines bright, we gather the stories, bring the shadows to light. From the ancient prophets to the visions anew, we're here to explore, to learn, to renew. Zion Media, where the journey begins, unlocking the mysteries, where the spirit wins. From the mountains of Mentina to the city of light, we're guiding the seekers through the darkest night. words of the prophets echoing in our soul. We dive into the scriptures, seeking to make us whole. From the plains of America to the temples on high, we uncover the secrets as the eagles fly by. Sign Media, where the journey